So the Asian age has certainly already arrived, and you and I know that. But the difference today is that people are finally talking about Asia in a way that's not only about China, and they're taking into account this massive next wave of growth as well, which includes the other couple of billion people that have been neglected from the Asian narrative over the last 10 or 15 years.
Italy has joined the Belt and Road Initiative and is one of the first out the G7 to join, and that's caused a lot of concern across different continents and raised a few eyebrows in the diplomatic community. Did you see this coming whilst writing this book?
Oh, absolutely. You know, there's an entire chapter of the book called Why Europe Loves Asia. As you said, Italy is the first G7 country, but of course it was inevitable because it really goes back more than 10 years to the financial crisis and Europe, the Central European powers like France and Germany, having cut off some of the critical financing mechanisms for the developing or emerging Eastern and Southern countries. And those countries turned to China and to other Asian vehicles for financing, for money, for infrastructure, and so forth. Remember that Italy is doing this in a way to catch up to Germany and France, which already trade so much more with China and Asia than Italy does. And Italy is saying, wait, why can't we be part of that too? Why can't we have huge exports to China and Asia? And that's also why they joined Belt and Road. The future is not just Asian, but it's Eurasian. And Europe is doing a much better job of managing China and Asia's rise and an economic opportunity than the United States is.
When people talk about Asian growth, people always think about it as it's a plot by China to take over the world. But you call it as Asia stitching, intermingling. What do you mean by this?
Asia has been fragmented from, Asian countries have less dealings with each other, more with Europe, more with colonial powers. But now, indeed, for the past 30 years, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Asia has been stitching itself back together again. And Belt and Road is just the latest episode in that. One of my central arguments is that just because China is building a lot of roads, it doesn't mean that all roads lead to Beijing. What's happening is that lots of countries are building lots of roads in lots of directions and doing lots more trade with each other, with all of their neighbors.
For the younger generation, what does the future of Asia mean to them?
There are more young people in Asia than old people. China has a lot of young people and a lot of old people. Then there are the countries of South and Southeast Asia. That's 2.5 billion people with a much younger median age than China. So they're overwhelmingly young countries. So when I talk about the future being Asian, I also mean the choices that all of its young people are making. So I see Asians, the young Asians, rediscovering Asia, whether it's because they're learning Chinese or they're backpacking in Indonesia or they're going for meditation in India, whatever the case may be. The walls are coming down, the borders are coming down in Asia. It's such a different narrative within Asia than in the West, where we talk about borders going up and protectionism and xenophobia. That is not the Asian story.
Let's discuss about the future, because that's what your expertise is on. Do you think the US will ever join a global initiative started by the Chinese?
I want to give you a subtle answer because it's probably the correct one, which is that the way global governance and diplomacy work is that, things start out as my initiative or your initiative, like, the World Bank and the IMF. We think of them as Western organizations, or the World Trade Organization, obviously. But over time, what happens is that everyone does join them in some way, shape, or form, and they find ways to shape them to their own advantage, and they wind up having a very powerful voice. America doesn't call all the shots. It may get to decide who's the head of those organizations, but when you look at their policies, it's increasingly a much more mixed picture. And that's what will also happen to Chinese initiatives like the Belt and Road. Right now, of course, China calls all the shots. China writes the rules. China decides the interest rates and where the projects get done. We know that. But I have no doubt, and I give many examples of this in the book, of how countries will start to push back and they'll negotiate and they'll play tough. And other countries will come in with competing offers.
What are the repercussions if the US don't join?
The world will ignore you. So that has been my lesson to policymakers in Washington, to decision makers that I've been meeting with when I've been traveling there, is saying, don't pretend that something as significant as the new Silk Roads are simply going to fall apart because American leadership is not there. It's quite the opposite. It's almost thriving because America is not getting in the way.